So good afternoon, doctor. This is Kushbu from Harmonica Acupuncture. We are a division of Gynae and IVF where we have renowned brands like Fibroid, Dynofirst, Usorem, Online DS. So basically, we deal with all therapy segments of gynecologists. And I like to welcome you all for this wonderful webinar which we have on medical management of uterine fibroids and endometriosis by our two renowned speakers, Dr. Queen Aditya and Dr. Sadhana Gupta, and our Siliguri Option Gynae Societies and the other chairperson and president would be introduced by Dr. Savana. So let me invite Dr. Savana Chowdhury. She is an alumni of Kasturba Medical College, Bangalore. Currently working as a senior gynecologist and feminine aesthetic surgeon. She is a founder of Savana's She Matters Women Clinic at Delhi and Imphal and Savana's SM Academy of Feminine Health at Manipur. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being here. And I hand over the session to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Khushbu, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. To start with, I would like to invite the chief guest of today's event, Dr. Gitendra Sharma. Brief introduction. Actually, Dr. Gitendra Sharma, he does not need any introduction as such. But Dr. Gitendra Sharma, he is a practicing gynecologist and obstetrician in Ahmedabad for the last 28 years. He's an MD in Obs and Gynae, medical legal counselor. He has done LLB with 15 gold medals, topped Gujarat University Law. He is the author of the books, not only one, three I have, Law in Obs and Gynae Practice, Consents in Obstetrics and Gynecology, Laws a Doctor Must Know, which is very important. Given more than 1,500 lectures all over India. Vice President-elect FOXI 2022. Congratulations, sir. His chairperson, Ethics and Medical Legal Committee, FOXI 2017 to 2019. President AOGS Ahmedabad Obstetrician Society 2016 to 2017. Hosted AICOG in 2017 January. He's honorary joint secretary SOGOG 2017 to 2019. We welcome you, sir. I request you kindly to deliver a few lines.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Savana for kind introduction, Dr. Queenie in specific for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be the chief guest of this function. I would like to thank Siliguri Obstetric and Gynecological Society. In specific, whenever Siliguri word comes, Dr. G.P. Das, Dr. Udayan Sarkar sir, for inviting me as a chief guest in this function. Dr. Priyankur is also a good friend in Siliguri. And I used to visit Siliguri every alternate month. So due to lockdown for last 4 to 5 months, I could not visit, but I visit Siliguri every alternate month. I feel honored to be the chief guest, although I can say that I am feeling a little bit odd in presence of Dr. Sadhana Madam to be the chief guest. She is my senior and we follow her, and I acknowledge her presence, and I will love to hear her lecture. So thank you very much, and I wish this webinar all the success. We know today the topics are fibroid and endometriosis. So endometriosis is the topic in which there are maximum number of medical legal cases filed against doctors. Whether it is a laparoscopic surgery in endometriosis, whether it is a conservative treatment given to the patient in endometriosis, or whether any operative part which is there in endometriosis. So to treat endometriosis is always a challenge for a gynecologist. To diagnose endometriosis, also a challenge to a gynecologist. So I wish that this webinar on fibroid and endometriosis will be a great success. Once again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be the chief guest of this webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we start our speaker session. The first speaker is Dr. Sadhana Gupta. So to chair the session, I would like to call upon Dr. Udayan Sarkar. Dr. Udayan Sarkar is DGO, MD, Obs&Gyn, DNB, Obs&Gyn. He's a professor and HOD, Department of ONG, MGM Medical College, Kishanganj. He is also the Honorary Secretary, Siliguri Obstetrician Society. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Savana, for the kind introduction. Now, today we have a very interesting discussion on fibroid and endometriosis. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Queen, for having inviting me in the presence of all the stalwarts like Dr. Sadhana Gupta, Dr. Jitendra Sharma. I am proud to introduce Dr. Sadhana Gupta. Her major achievements include she was the FOGSI representative to SAFOG 2018 to August 2020. She was the ICOG Governing Council member from 2015 to 20, corresponding editor, Journal of Obs-Gynae India 2017 to 20. She was the Vice President of FOGSI in 2016 and Chairperson FOGSI Safe Motherhood Committee 2011 to 14. FOGSI representative to WHO UNFPA workshops on postnatal care and achieving MDG, quality RCH on essential postnatal and newborn care. She was the chairman UP ISR chapter, ISAR chapter 2017 to 2019, and she was the founder president Gorakhpur chapter of ISOPAR 2020. At present, she is the director and senior consultant at Jivan Jyoti Hospital and Medical Research Center at Jivan Jyoti Advanced Infertility Center. She is also the founder trustee, Jivan Jyoti Trust, Gorakhpur. She holds the Chancellor's Medal for Best MBBS Student at SN Medical College, Agra. She was the recipient of 9 gold medals in MBBS. Dr. Nawal Kishore Gold Medal for Best PG Student. She won thrice a Korean Award for Best Scientific Research Paper in 2002, 4, and 9. 4 times Best Research Paper Award in AICOG, and thrice Dr. DC Datta Prize for Best FOGSI Publication. And she has also received many social and organizational awards like Mr. N.A. Pandit and Mrs. Shailaja N. Pandit Women's Empowerment Award, Dr. Merudar Hansotia Award for Best Committee Chairperson, Dr. Durusha Award, Dr. R.N. Malhotra Award, Dr. Savita Rastogi Award for Best Doctor of UPIMA, and Padma Bhushan Kamalabai Hospet Award for work done to reduce maternal mortality. And she has a role in different conferences, workshops, and projects also, like Adolescent Congress 2000, ICOG Conference on Maternal Mortality, organizing chairperson North Zone JUA FOGSI 2010, and VP in charge of North Zone JUA FOGSI 2016. She was also the organizing chairperson of Saving Mothers International Conference 2016 and 19. She is the coordinator of maternal mortality workshops, Helping Mothers Survive program, PPH, critical care, and optimizing ANC workshops pan-India as Vice President FOGSI 2016. She is the champion for M4M and Mannata FOGSI project. And she has numerous publications to her credit, 20 original research publications. Sole author of Caesarean Delivery, Vaginal Delivery, and a comprehensive textbook on Obs-Gynae, which is translated in other language by JP and McGraw Publications. Editor, Safe Motherhood Initiative, A Silent Revolution, FOGSI Focus on Antenatal and Preconception Care, 7, Safe Motherhood Bulletin. I welcome Dr. Sadhana Gupta, madam, to present her lecture on fibroid and endometriosis. Welcome, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Udyan, for very kind introduction, and I owe a special thanks to Siliguri Obs-Gynae Society, Dr. Savana, Dr. Udyan, and Dr. Queen Aditya for taking this initiative. So, and I'm very happy to be with Dr. Giten Sharma, who has been a close FOGSI friend, and we really wish him all the best for the FOGSI tenure. So, topic today is medical management of endometriosis, and I bring greeting from FOGSI to Siliguri and the Northeast states. But I love these places which are really a word of beauty, and I can say the God. So we really miss this traveling. So coming to endometriosis, and Dr. Giten has already set the stage that endometriosis can be how difficult. So Sir William Osler age ago really commented very, very wisely, he or she who knows endometriosis knows gynecology. Maybe in next 20 or 25 minutes, I will like reveal some, unravel some curtain over this enigmatic disease. So let's go from the basic, because we have to understand basic steps that lead to classic solution. So what is endometriosis? It is a presence of estrogen dependent endometrial like tissue, which is not in the residual place, that is endometrium, it is somewhere else, and which result in sustained inflammatory reaction and lead to chronic disease. Deep infiltrating endometriosis is a different entity which is arbitrarily defined as endometriotic lesion which extend more than 5 millimeter underneath the peritoneum. This is the Foxy GCPR 2017, how it defined. And so it is a chronic inflammatory reaction, and we have the endometrium outside uterus anywhere in the body. American Fertility Society and ASRM classified endometriosis according to size of lesion, what is location, extent, and how we can categorize it from minimal to severe. Why it is interests us so much? Because it is an elusive, confusing, and complicated disease. We still know what causes endometriosis in that particular woman. The boundaries between physiological state and disease are not well defined, and it is seen from menarche to menopause and even after hysterectomy and beyond menopause. It affects women of reproductive age group, causes a large burden of infertility. We have multiple modality of treatment, and there are more chances of repeated surgeries, including panhysterectomy. So it is a thing, it is a benign, but in many women a progressive disease. So the wide spectrum of clinical problem across the age that occurs with endometriosis frustrates everyone: gynecologists, patient, pathologists, surgeons, laparoscopic surgeons, and other physicians like GIT specialists or the urologists, because the patient goes on visiting them for their various problems. So incidence, of course, we all really witness that incidence of endometriosis has been increasing. It is a real one or a imaginary, always we see, because we are doing more laparoscopy, we are having advanced imaging techniques, so we are diagnosing more. Yes, of course, we are diagnosing more. One important message which we want to give to audience is that finding endometrial implant in peritoneal cavity in a asymptomatic patient can be totally physiological finding, because the retrograde menstruation is a physiological process. So we have to differentiate between physiological and pathological. And it is again the enigma of today's century. Still, it can take time to 4 to 6 to 10 years that absolutely that this patient is having endometriosis. So this is a chart which shows from 15 to 19 to 50 to 55 years, we have and we find endometriosis in every age group, but the peak is between 30 to 40 years, that is the reproductive age group. And that is the thing, that when the woman is in the prime age group, then they suffer from endometriotic associated pain, various sort, and there's the infertility. So 176 million women all over the world, and in India, 26 million women, we suppose women suffer from the endometriosis. Now, what is the socio-economic burden of endometriosis? We prescribe a lot of drugs, few drugs I will discuss in today's presentation. We go for many diagnostic modality, many surgeries, multiple surgery, a different sort of surgery, healthcare because of GP, nurses, urologists. What I say, the different discipline also get the patient of endometriosis because they fail to diagnose endometriosis, and the all decrease in productivity, education, and activity. So the burden of endometriosis on the socio-economic and the productive front is enormous. As I said, the cause of the endometriosis is uncertain. We find retrograde menstruation, what Sampson says in the long ago, but actually it is the favorable endocrine and metabolic environment and altered immunity and inflammatory response in genetically susceptible women which cause symptomatic endometriosis in that particular woman. Like in COVID, we know two things. What is the cytokine response, and second is immunity. I think that is the basic of development of every disease. It is the primary thing, that is the endometriosis or the retrograde menstruation, but we have to have the favorable endocrine metabolic environment genetically susceptibility, and our body's response, which cause the full-fledged disease. Another enigma of endometriosis that we don't know that in that particular woman, what will be the course of endometriosis, and what is having mild disease in her 20s will remain same or it will progress at a later age. So let's love it because it is a mysterious disease. It is something. So physiology is estrogen dependent activation of the NF-kappa B, which causes prostaglandin, then inflammation and proliferation of endometrial cell and angiogenesis, which cause all the symptoms. Rapid, we all know reactive oxygen species. Oxidative stress is the cause of many diseases, which cause so many things, and it finally leads to chronic inflammation, recruitment of lymphocyte macrophage, which produce cytokine, and that cause all the pain and all the inflammation. Immunity is there, autoimmune disease is more common, and when there is a triggered inflammatory response caused by retrograde menstruation, that cause defective immunosurveillance, that the macrophage is not able to prevent the elimination of menstrual dissolved debris, and this promote the implantation and growth of endometrial cells in the ectopic. So this is a like combination of genetics, environment, immunity, and the physiological process of retrograde menstruation that causes finally symptomatic endometriosis. This is the one slide which I really want. It is a beautiful slide that why it is mystery. It is a benign disease, but it is locally invasive, and we find proliferation in pelvic lymph nodes. So it is a little bit nature-like malignancy. In minimal disease, we find severe pain, and many large endometrioma are totally asymptomatic. When we give cyclic hormone, it causes growth of endometriosis. When we give continuous hormone, it reverses the growth pattern. So what are the symptoms? It is the pain, dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, chronic pelvic pain, intermenstrual pain. Then the second thing, when the woman likes to be in family life, it causes infertility and chronic fatigue and the negative impact on quality of life. So this is one thing, like many times in OPD, when the woman say pain, we say she is psycho and we give antidepressant. It may be endometriosis. That should be in our differential diagnosis. Why there is pain? It is cytokine, prostaglandin. But in deep infiltrating endometriosis, it destroys tissue and nerve. And when there is a rupture chocolate cyst, it may cause irritation of peritoneum. When there is severe disease, scar and fibrosis, then the restricted mobility. When it is adhered to bowel, you have the painful defecation. When it is bladder, attached to bladder, it is painful dysuria. And there is dyspareunia as well. So endometriosis causes infertility in 50% of women, and there is a marked reduction of fertility in the women with endometriosis. But actually, we still don't know how endometriosis causes infertility. It is always subfertility. So in moderate to severe, yes, it is tubal blockage, it is blockage to sperm migration, but in mild to minimal, it is a subtle effect, toxic effect on gamete and embryo, increased rate of apoptosis, enhanced ability to phagocytize sperm, reduced rate of fertilization after ART, and impaired implantation because of defect in endometrial receptivity. Not only this, it also affects the hypothalamus pituitary axis also to cause the subfertility. But this is a one golden statement by SRM which says that we know so many mechanisms, but we don't know that it is a proving effect to reduce fertility in patients. And medical treatment, this is again important to suppress endometriosis, actually does not improve fecundity, but may result in delay in achieving pregnancy. So diagnosis is very important. I say we take a lot of time still. So Foxy GCPR says that whenever there is a chronic pelvic pain, dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, dysuria, dysphagia, please consider the differential diagnosis of endometrium and be aware endometriosis, and be aware that it can present in other organs. So if there is a during menstruation, if it is cyclic pneumothorax, hematophagia, hematuria, umbilical bleeding, look for endometriosis. A clinical finding in the world of imaging, we really fail to do many times a good clinical examination, and this modality should be our like gold standard or should be our specialized art. So when we do the pervaginal examination, nodularity of uterosacral ligament, when you see pervaginal, you go into the posterior vaginal cortex, patient winces. That is the like clue to endometriosis, which no imaging can give you. Painful swelling of rectovaginal septum, and when you try to move the uterus, patient has the pain. Fixed retroverted uterus, large immobile adnexa and endometrium in surgical scar, and many very uncommonly you can see endometriosis when you do the periscraculum endometriosis on cervix or upper vagina. So a good clinical examination is very important. Even though if you don't find any clinical evidence, it does not rule out the endometriosis. These are all differential diagnosis, non-gynecological as well as gynecological. One very important thing, which as an Indian doctor, we have to see that the tubercular tuboadnexal mark sometimes really confuses us, beside the degenerative leiomyoma or hemorrhagic ovarian cyst. We do the transvaginal ultrasonography or transabdominal even when we have a large endometrioma. The two things which I say, endometrioma we can diagnose very easily, but the subtle sign are the kissing ovary and the negative sliding sign. Like you don't see the movement of the bowel and you see the fixed ovaries, that gives you clue to the minimal endometriosis, and we can add with the sonovaginography. Color Doppler, pericystic flow, no intracystic flow, CT, MRI usually not needed except in cases of deep infiltrating endometriosis. Diagnostic laparoscopy is still considered the gold standard for the diagnosis of endometriosis, and we can have classical as well as the non-classical. But we must have a good protocol for doing laparoscopy, like good view, recognize subtle lesion, and recognition then DIE may appear minimal on peritoneal surface. And ASRM and all professional body strongly document that illustrate the operative appearance of disease, including the more important feature of endometriosis and pelvic pain. Nowadays, there is some, like especially in a big city, they give CD and something. I think being like seeing CD full, and it is something very difficult, and still we must like the good imaging and a good documentation on the diagram gives you a good clue. So it can be mild, moderate, severe, and this is how SRM says that you should document location, extent, and depth of the disease. 1, 2, 3, 4. Biomarker we do CA125, not for diagnosis, but sometimes when you are really doubting malignancy and useful for tracking the disease. No other biomarker has been proven for a clinical practice. Now coming to management part, this is very important. That is the main crux. And when we have the when we choose the medical treatment, individualized choices, and we will see how we can individualize choice. If we are opting for surgery, individualize and optimize time and what surgery you are doing, and medical treatment with and after surgery depend upon the priority of the patient. So that is very important thing, with that when it is not so you go to endoscopic surgery and he and she do the surgery. We have to be very careful in management of endometriosis. Why we want to treat? We want to improve quality of life. We want to treat infertility, sometimes both. And what is our aim? We want to improve natural fertility, pain relief, adjuvant to surgery, before surgery and after surgery, and enhance success rate of ART. So endometriosis should be viewed as a chronic disease. It is not an acute problem which is going to solve with your 3 months or 6 months or 1 year drug or one surgery. It requires a lifelong management plan with goal of maximizing use of medical treatment and avoiding repeated surgical procedures. So I can say this is a golden statement: maximum use of medical treatment and avoid surgeries. So how we take the individualized decision, how severe is the pain, how severe is the disease, what is the reproductive desire, patient age, medication side effect, what is the surgical complication rate, and the cost. These are the things which we have to consider when we give any management plan to our patient. And what we want to do in surgery, we want to restore normal pelvic activity, anatomy, removal of endometric implant, and prevention of recurrence. So we have to be very clear, and we have so many medical drugs and few surgical options. And let's see what is the best option available for management of endometriosis. So what is the hormonal management? We want either pseudo pregnancy or pseudo menopause like state. Either we create that state or that state. And we want to establish amenorrhea without induction of hypoestrogenism. So this is the goal of hormonal treatment. Now coming to the most commonly given, especially in the younger age group, that is the combined oral contraceptive, which cause anovulation and descellulization of endometrial tissue. One important thing which I wish to communicate, that in an initial phase, because it has got the estrogen component, the symptom can stimulate the growth and increase pain during the first few weeks of treatment. And I think you may remember somewhere that this time the pain was more and you are suddenly troubled. We have given COC why there is more dysmenorrhea. This is important. And then after few cycles, it got in the relief of the pain. Side effects for all COC: weight gain, breakthrough bleeding, breast tenderness. There is symptomatic relief of pain in 60 to 95%, and usually we give the low dosage estradiol pills. This is important, but COC is not an approved indication for endometriosis. It gives the symptomatic relief for the, especially for the endometriosis associated pelvic pain. There is a problem of breakthrough bleeding. Another drug which we frequently prescribe is the NSAID. Now, all it is because it is cytokine storm, it is prostaglandin. So when we give NSAID, it gives the symptomatic relief because of alteration in PG metabolism and initiation of interleukin reaction. Now, danazol was the first drug for endometriosis. In when our resident, I really had some drug person like organized in our department. It was the first drug caused to be miracle drug at that time. But over the time, we came to know that it caused hypoestrogenic but hyperandrogenic state, because it occupies receptor site or sex hormone binding globulin, so increase serum free testosterone level. So it is hyperandrogenic state. So the woman after 3 or 6 months got acne, hirsutism, deepening of voice, and there is also associated adverse effect on lipid profile and the liver enzyme, as well as the mood changes. So in today's world of metabolic disorder, adverse lipid profile is considered to be very important adverse effect. And if the patient, if get pregnant, then if it is female fetus, it can cause virilization. So a little caution about it. It is a good effective drug for endometriosis associated pelvic pain, but the lower doses are better tolerated, but also less effective. So nowadays, it is not a drug of choice because of its adverse effects. GnRH agonist, we have now a good experience, 3.75 milligram per month, 11.25 every 3 months. This is important because it is a good effective drug for endometriosis, but it needs create a menopause-like symptom, severe hypoestrogenism. So we had to add back with either combined oral contraceptive or triptotribolone or aloxifene. So this is costly drug, this is injectable drug, and it causes the more adverse effects. Now coming to progestin, which is actually usually drugs given in the cases of endometriosis, it causes decellulization and atrophy of endometrial tissue. So medroxyprogesterone, norethindrone, and Dimpa, these were the initial generated progesterone. And how progestin works, it is, we all know it is immunomodulator, anti-inflammatory, anti-angiogenic, and it causes decellulization and atrophy of endometrial tissue, is given continuously, and reduction of serum estrogen level. So with the first generation of progestin, now we have got the 4th generation progestin, that is Dinogus. So this is the chemical compound, what R&D of the world research do. This is additional double bond, and we come to get some miracle drugs, some very, very drugs which are useful for people. And Dinogus is a progestin that combines properties of both 19-nortestosterone derivative and progesterone derivative. So it is anti-proliferative, anti-angiogenic, and anti-inflammatory. Given dose is very less, that is 2 milligram per day, we achieve the theoretical window with moderate suppression of E2 level. Thus avoids its progression of lesion as well as the hypoestrogenic side effect. So beauty of this drug is that the GnRH analog cause severe hypoestrogenism, hot flushes, reduction in bone mineral density, mood changes, but it does not cause that low level of suppression. Still in that dose, it avoids the progression of the lesion. So this is all progestin, and you can see in the last line that it is progestogenic, it is antigonadotrophic, it is not It is not androgenic, and it does not have any mineralocorticoid-like activity. So this is very important in today's world when we are struggling with a lot of load of the metabolic disorders. So the use of progestin.
Excuse me, ma'am. 20 minutes.
It is okay. I will
No, it's
just
okay.
need 7 minutes more, 7
Yeah,
to 8
please.
minutes. Okay. So progestin monotherapies has been used, and Dinogesis is only product that licensed for the treatment of endometriosis. So it has a high bioavailability, and it has no interaction, a second important point, with the various hepatic binding globulin, SHBG, and the corticosteroid binding globulin. So Dinogesis is the first choice, and this is just to emphasize that it has got properties of progesterone derivative. It is anti-androgenic, good tolerability, and it has got the many maintained beneficial effect of estradiol in bone, cardiovascular system, and CNS. So that is the beauty of the product, and it causes the reduced cell proliferation and reduction in menstrual bleeding in the normal endometrium, and in ectopic endometrium it has anti-angiogenic effect, immunomodulatory, and anti-inflammatory effect. So there is a reduction of the endometriosis associated pelvic pain. So by all the action, it causes the reduction of the symptoms. So this is the new study in 2017, which says that the ideal agent in the metriosis is the Dinogesis. Dose is 2 milligram once daily. Usually it is preferred you start from 5th day of menstrual cycle, but you can start at any day. It does not have any relation with the food, and it must be continued regardless of the vaginal bleeding. That is very, very important. Another important thing is it is as effective as GnRH analog in the pain, with the decrease of the endometrial associated pelvic pain. So I will give you few studies. It is in Asian studies which shows that how Dinogesis has improved the quality of life and the endometriosis health profile as compared to other drugs. So this is our own Indian study which shows that amelioration of health-related quality of life and endometriosis associated pelvic pain has got a marked effect with the use of Dinogesis. This is again a study which shows that the Dinogesis is very effective drug for 6 months in treating endometriosis associated pain. This is the comparison with the GnRH analog, which says that it is equally effective, but there are less side effects. And again, it shows that it is as effective as the GnRH analog. This is again a study compares with the norethindrone acetate, which shows that the norethindrone acetate also relieves symptoms, but the symptoms are more controlled and a better quality of life when we use Dinogesis and not norethindrone. So it is compared, it is proven to be a novel drug. It is comparison with the dydrogesterone, which usually we don't give as a treatment of endometriosis, but this studies has been comparing with dydrogesterone, and which again says that both drugs are effective, but the effectivity of the Dinogesis is much higher than the dydrogesterone. This is one interesting study which we usually say in the large endometrioma, we opt for surgery. It is a recommendation also. But few studies, this is the case report which shows that the 9 centimeter cyst endometrioma has reduced with the prolonged therapy of 22 months and with the long-term treatment of 65 weeks. So maybe in adolescent girls, or when the woman doesn't desire of surgery, we can consider long-term Dinogesis for even for the large endometrioma. Now, DIE, deep infiltrating endometriosis, is something where surgery can be very, very complicated, like bowel injury, which really I fear. And whole of the world has reverted that don't do surgery for DIE, or never do repeat surgery for DIE. And we need to have the drug like Dinogesis. It is again which shows that with the GnRH analog, whether it is leuprolide, decapeptyl, or butyryl acetate, we have the advantage of Dinogesis because it is no effect on the bone mineral density, and we don't need any backup drugs for it. In adenomyosis also it has been effective as we can have a choice. So ASHRAE said that the progestin are the recommended treatment for endometriosis, and Dinogus is one of the novel drugs, and we have to take account of cost, which is GnRH analog is much higher, and the complication adverse effect when we consider long-term treatment. And LNG IUCD is also one of the option in the treatment of endometriosis. How long we can give it? There are many studies we can give up to 52, up to 65 week Dinogus, and it has not been shown not tolerable, or it has been shown safe for long-term use as a prophylaxis. So for long-term studies, these are all studies actually compiled the studies that we can give it very safely for 1 to 2 years up to 65 weeks. We should be very like it is a very safe drug for the long-term management which the patient with endometriosis actually needs. One slide, this is important, that we are having a few combination of Dinogus with ethinyl estradiol, are both same, or we can give a low-cost treatment for treatment of endometriosis. Up to now, the studies are very less on the combined use of estradiol and Dinogus. It has not been approved yet for endometriosis. It is a contraceptive, so women desiring pregnancy, it should not be used. And long-term safety, like in COC, we always want to give a gap after 4 to 6 months. Increased risk of VT is there whenever there is estrogen. So the Dinogus monotherapy is very preferable choice till now for the treatment of endometriosis. It is my last 3 or 4 slides where I say how can we like implement this knowledge in our clinical practice. So adolescent endometriosis, NSAID and COC are very good option. And if they are not relieved, then we should go to the Dinogus, because it is a safe method, it is a safe drug, and we can use it for a longer time. GnRH agonist in adolescent, preferably with very much caution, and absolutely no below 16 to 18 years. If DIMPA and GnRH, we have to be very careful about the BMD reduction. Laparoscopy for endometrioma, balance very carefully surgery, because there is a real danger to loss of ovarian reserve. And you have to balance what is the pain relief and the loss of ovarian reserve. We have to balance, and always in an expert hand. Asymptomatic endometriosis, the professional body says don't treat it if there is no symptom, except it is when you think that it can be malignant, and it can be other thing when you want to have the biopsy, and medical management will not result in complete resolution. Symptomatic, we have to treat, as we say, for pain, for fertility, and we want to conserve uterus, the medical treatment is very good, and we have all the choices. And surgery has got a midway, when you the medical treatment fails, or when you want to enhance like success rate of ART procedure. In infertility, the go by hand, mild and moderate endometriosis, it is expected management or ovulation, IUI. Not succeed, then laparoscopy, and then go to ART. If there is a large endometrioma, I will say surgery is needed only in ART when endometrioma comes in a way of follicle pickup. That is the only thing. Otherwise, there is now a question mark on the surgery of endometriosis in enhancing infertility. And with Dinogus, one thing I want to point out, that after cessation of Dinogus, fertility remains in about 30 days of withdrawal. Scar endometriosis always need the surgical treatment, and don't waste the time in medical treatment. Recurrent endometriosis, either Dinogus, either COC or GnRH agonist, we have to consider it, because it is a disease which rarely comes back, and you can have the choice. So finally, to conclude, it is a Dinogus is a 4th generation progestin, very effective drug for the pain, and it reduces pain and endometriotic lesion, can be used for a long-term indication, higher efficacy or equal efficacy than GnRH analog, but there are less adverse effects like hot flushes, vaginal dryness, and the BMD. So to conclude, the first line medical management for endometriosis, which is an enigmatus and a lifelong disease, Dinogus, other progestin, and followed by OCP in the sequence of priority. Recurrent endometriosis, Dinogus is a good choice. Post-operative therapy, GnRH agonist for 6 months, Dinogus for long time, and COC also for long time. adolescent endometriosis, NSID, OCP, and Dinogests in order of priority. And infertile women, infertility management, surgery, short course of Dinogests with simultaneous infertility management. So thank you very much. And I seek your support, full-hearted support for my coming after serving Foxy in many, many capacities. I seek to go for the Foxy president election next year, and I seek your support, and we wish to have a long and stronger association in Foxy. Thank you very much. Stop share.
Thank you, Dr. Sadhana, an excellent, Sadhana Gupta, an excellent talk, especially endometriosis. It's a disease which affects both mental and physical, and it really affects quality of life of a woman. And in 30 minutes, you have completed, covered almost every aspect, even the scar endometriosis, how to talk. I'm surprised. Anyway, thank you. Congratulations. And Dr. Dayan, would you like to summarize? Okay. Now, our next speaker of today's event is my dear friend, Queenie Aditya, queen of our hearts, queen of Foxy, queen of Bengal, queen of everything. Queenie will be speaking on medical management of fibroid. A quick introduction of Queenie. She is a consultant gynecologist at MRI Hospital, Kolkata, Narayana Memorial Hospital, Kolkata, Behala Balananda Brahmachari Hospital, and Kasturi Medical College, Kolkata. She has a special interest in gynae endocrinology, vaginal surgeries, high-risk obstetrics, education and work. She stood 10th in higher secondary examination conducted by the West Bengal Board of Higher Secondary Examinations, and first among girls in 1988 from GMGS. Also ranked 4th in West Bengal JEE. Passed MBBS with honors and GM from Medical College Kolkata in 1993. Passed MD from Medical College Kolkata in 1999. Shifted to Delhi, where she charmed all of us, and practiced in several hospitals there from 1999 to 2016. She had relocated, breaking our hearts, to hometown Kolkata in 2016. Recognitions received are Chief Minister's Gold Medal for being the most outstanding girl candidate in the higher secondary examination in 1988 in the state of West Bengal. Over to you, Queen.
Thank you so much, dearest Savannah, for those very, very kind words of appreciation. Pranam to you too. I thank my seniors for being here. First of all, Sadhana ma'am, what a wonderful lecture from you, and speaking after you is actually making me quite scared, because living up to the standards that you have set is very difficult. I will try my level best to do so, but still, I really congratulate you on the brilliant speech that you have just now given. And once more, you have already mentioned about your upcoming elections. Me, on behalf of this webinar, and as your friend and someone who knows you so well, I would request everyone kindly support ma'am. Sadhana ma'am is a learned person, very, very dedicated, and we need someone of her stature to head our Foxy. And thereby I request everyone kindly, please do remember ma'am when you cast your vote. So, so this is really wishing you the very best, ma'am. And next, I would like to speak about my Dada, Gitendra sir, whom I call Dada since the last several years. And the last time when we were in a webinar, we were all wishing him the very best. And now it's our privilege, all of us, that we are there with him, his close friends who are so happy about his victory. He had to win. There were no two ways about it, but it has finally happened, and we are all very, very happy for him. And I congratulate you once more. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sparing your time, your very precious time for us. On my one small invitation, immediately you said, yes, I'm really, really grateful, and pranam to you, sir. Then comes Udayan Da from Siliguri, who is also my respected Dada. He also, as soon as I called him and requested him to spare some time in this webinar. He immediately said yes. So Dada, pranam to you too. Thank you so much. And my dear friend Savannah, no matter how busy she is doing her aesthetic work from morning till evening, she spared time for me because I requested her. So once again, thank you, Savannah, for sparing your time and for always being beside me. You are one of my closest friends, and big hug to you from so far. And thank you, team Acumentis Harmonica and Khushbu, for giving us this platform and this opportunity. So now, without wasting any more time, we are going to start on the second. We are talking about the various medical options, because in both the topics that Sadhana ma'am has spoken and I am talking about, surgery is always an option. But the lower number of surgeries we can perform, the better, because these are things. Endometriosis is there lifelong. Fibroid might be removed by surgery, but no one knows whether another one is going to come up. So a person who is prone to have fibroids can keep having them again. So just removal of a fibroid, that too not too huge a size, is not a very good option in today's day, where medical management is also available. And so many of our patients, we the clinicians have seen that so many of our patients have responded well. And thereby, before we just jump with a knife and chop her things off, it is better that we consider medical management, because in many cases they are amenable to medical management. So let us go into the medical management of uterine fibroids. And I personally use mifepristone a lot in this regard compared to the other medications that are available. So I will speak more about mifepristone than anything else. So just please give me a second. I would. Yes. Just trying to make it full screen. So is it a visible full screen, Savannah? Is it visible full screen? Okay. Then I'm starting. So we are talking about the medical management of uterine fibroids. And as I already mentioned, I'm the successor of my dear and most respected and lovable senior Sadhana ma'am. So please ma'am, क्षमा कर देना, आपके level का होगा नहीं. फिर भी क्षमा कर देना. I will try my level best.
You will do like a queen. I know it.
So I have heard you earlier also, and I know how good a speaker you are, and you have done full justice to your topic today. I will not be able to do as well as you did, but I will still try my level best. Kindly bear with me. Thank you so much, everyone. So we are talking about the medical management of uterine fibroids, and as I mentioned, I will be speaking more about mifepristone than anything else, because that is what I personally use. And when we are talking about fibroids, I would like to say a few things about AUB, because AUB, according to ACOG, is bleeding from the uterine corpus that is abnormal in regularity, volume, frequency, or duration, and occurs in the absence of pregnancy. So that is, NICE and all the other bodies have now also come out with definitions, but more or less it's this. And why I'm talking about this is that the earlier terminologies in regard to heavy bleeding, painful bleeding, all of that we were using, metrorrhagia, hypomenorrhea, all of these terminologies are nowadays not used anymore. All of them come under the umbrella of AUB. Just to re-emphasize the fact that we talk about AUB more than anything else, and we do not use these terminology anymore. These are more or less obsolete. That's why I just put up this slide. And according to the FIGO classification, we will talk about fibroids, but fibroid it comes under the umbrella of the PALM-COAN. That's why I just wanted to talk about PALM-COAN also. But in 2011, the FIGO had mentioned the menstrual disorders group and stratified into 9 basic categories. As all of us clinicians, we know, is the PALM and the COAN. And it's very easily with the PALM and with the COAN in our hand. That is how we can classify them. And PALM is basically those that have some structural deformity, like PALM is polyp, adenomyosis, leiomyoma, that is fibroid, our topic, and malignancy and hyperplasia that comes under PALM. And COAN is coagulopathy, ovarian dysfunction, endometrial pathology, iatrogenic, something that we might have done. We might have put the patient on medication which is causing it, and the N is not otherwise classified. So a lot of people used to earlier think that N means neoplasia, but no, N out here means not otherwise classified, and neoplasia comes under the malignancies, that is in the PALM, that is the structural problems, pathology. So we have the PALM and COAN, and so amongst the PALM is the leiomyoma, which we are going to talk about in a little bit more of a detail. So as I already mentioned, this is PALM and COAN. We can see the COAN, we can see the PALM. This is for everyone, all the clinicians, so that we can easily remember. When we are thinking of earlier what we used to call DUB or any of those menorrhagia, metrorrhagia, menometrorrhagia, we don't use any of that. if it's abnormal bleeding, we think of Palm and Cohen. So that is just to remind everyone that this is the way we should approach the things. I just put this up. So the prevalence of fibroids is, Indian prevalence shows, according to the Ministry of Health of the and Family Welfare of the Government of India, 20 to 30% of Indian women in the reproductive age group have fibroid uterus, and at any given time, around 20 million or more of Indian women have fibroid uterus. And as we can see, according to the prevalence in the age groups, mostly it is between 36 and 55, the maximum being between 45 and 50, but nevertheless between 36 and 55, that those 20 years are the maximum number of cases. But unfortunately, we do get patients below 35, as many of us have seen in our practice, that we usually get to know when they are suffering from infertility. Either that might be the cause or it might be incidental, but we get it in a lot of reproductive age group women as well. And 35 to 55, as we can see in the prevalence, that it is very common. And now the FIGO, we had spoken about Palm Cohen. So FIGO has also classified the various types of fibroids according to with 0 to 8, 0 being the peduncle, that is from inside to outside. The gradation we have to remember, it starts from inside the uterine cavity to outside, from submucosal to subserosal. So it starts like 0, that is the pedunculate and intracavitary. Then 1 is less than 50% is it's intramural, but less than 50% is intramural. 2 is more than 50% is intramural. 3 is it contacts the endometrium, but 100% is intramural. 4 is it is totally, as we can see in the picture, 4 is totally intramural and it does not touch the endometrium at all. Then comes the subserous, where less than more than 50% is intramural. Then comes that is 5, and subserous with less than 50% intramural, mostly subserous, that comes as 6. 7 is when it becomes pedunculated, not within the myometrium at all. And 8 is that when it is located in any other non-common or rare situation like cervical, parasitic, or anything else. So this is basically the classification according to the site where it is present. Now coming to the various investigations which are more or less common for AUB as well as fibroids, the basic things we all know: CBC, UPT, if we have to rule out a pregnancy in many cases, because even in a fibroid there can be irregular bleeding, so we should rule out a pregnancy as well. TSH we all know, bleeding time, platelet count, prothrombin time, APTT, these are the things we all do. And imaging, ultrasound is mandatory to evaluate the uterus adnexa and endometrial thickness. Doppler ultrasonography can help us to rule out an arteriovenous malformation, malignancy cases, and to differentiate between fibroid and adenomyomas. Saline infusion sonography, if intracavitary lesion is suspected, it can be that grade 0 or grade 1, so that will help us. Hysteroscopy for diagnosis and characterization of the intrauterine abnormality, specifically it is submucous or grade 0 or 1. Then we come to the 3D ultrasound, which is evaluating intramyometrial lesion in selected patients for fibroid mapping. It will help us. MRI can help us to differentiate between fibroids and adenomyomas, and for mapping the exact location of the fibroids while planning conservative surgery, and even before we go for any kind of therapy, that is surgical or embolization or anything else, to know the exact location. So as I mentioned that according to the Government of India, it is quite prevalent, 20 to 30% of the reproductive age group, and around 20 million or more of women are suffering from it. And so the various treatment options, like Sadhana ma'am had mentioned, here also I'm mentioning that the various treatment options are surgical options. We know all of them: hysterectomy, whether it's a total abdominal hysterectomy or laparoscopic hysterectomy, or whether it's a myomectomy, and then going for the non-surgical nowadays, that are the uterine artery embolization and the fibroid ablation by the ultrasonographic way, and various medical options which we all know, and can be oral contraceptives, progestogens, oral progestogens, intrauterine device, that is the levonorgestrel device. A lot of us are using that also as a treatment mode. NSAIDs, tranexamic acid to reduce the bleeding, others. And if we come to the main etiologic treatment, then comes the GnRH analogs and the selective progesterone receptor modulators. So these are the main things that are coming directly, because it works on the etiology of the fibroid. So the limitations of the different medical therapies is that the antifibrinolytic like tranexamic acid is used to treat menorrhagic excessive bleeding can increase the size of myoma. It might so happen, maybe certain studies have shown so, and it can have side effects like indigestion, diarrhea, headaches, etc. GnRH agonists are effective, quite effective in reducing the size, but they cause hot flushes, vaginal dryness, and decreased libido, as ma'am has already mentioned. Because it is used in endometriosis, it is also used in fibroid. The side effects are almost similar, and use is limited up to 6 months, as we all know, because of the severe estrogen deficiency, which can give rise to all the other problems along with reduced bone mineral density. So moreover, the painful injections can give rise to low compliance, and the patient might actually refuse to continue the treatment, and the risk of recurrence after discontinuation or after stopping the therapy might be more compared to the other modes of therapy, and it is definitely an expensive proposition. Oral progestogens can cause weight gain, acne, breakthrough bleeding, can increase the size of the myoma also. In certain cases, studies are there. And COCs can also give rise to breakthrough bleeding, not safe for very long time use, and there are studies which are also claiming that there can be increase in size of the myoma. Moreover, these are all estrogen dependent conditions, and thereby supplying estrogen is also of a doubtful reason. So now newer pathophysiology of uterine fibroids shows that progesterone plays a vital role in promoting uterine fibroid growth, and various, we can see the various journals who are talking of the same, and they are saying that progesterone receptor binding is 3 times higher in fibroid women and in women having fibroids compared to the normal myometrium. So in the fibroid tissue, the binding is much more compared to the normal myometrium. And so now we are coming to the low dose mifepristone for fibroids. It is a selective progesterone receptor modulator, as I have already mentioned. It is the first selective progesterone receptor modulator and has anti-progesterone action. It is used for uterine fibroids and studied worldwide with several trials, with several Indian controlled trials as well. Mifepristone can be compared with GnRH agonists in terms of their efficacy, and 10 milligram and 25 milligram daily dose have been clinically evaluated strengths in our Indian controlled trials, and in studies it decreases fibroid size considerably and decreases menorrhagia, dysmenorrhea, pelvic pain, and the other urinary symptoms. So the mechanism of action, when we compare it to the GnRH analog, there we see that GnRH analog primarily works on the pituitary and hampers the HPO axis. But selective progesterone receptor modulators, there are 2. Another one is also used in the market, that is ulipristal, and also mifepristone. These have a 3-way mode of action. Works directly on the fibroid. The direct action on the fibroid is reducing their size through the inhibition of the cell proliferation and induction of the apoptosis. On the endometrium, it directly it stops the uterine bleeding that is causing the woman so much of trouble, and it results in benign and reversible changes in the endometrial tissue. Enhanced some changes in them, but in cases of mifepristone, mostly the changes go towards an atrophy, whereas in ulipristal, we will see later, there have been cases or incidences of hyperplasia, but that is almost unknown of as far as mifepristone is concerned. And they also have their effect on the pituitary, as does the GnRH analog, by inhibiting the HPO axis. So it has a 3 mode of action, whereas GnRH analog has only a single way of action. There are several Indian clinical trials on low-dose mifepristone and presented in several conferences. And all of these conferences in AICOG, it had been concluded that in 2016, it had been concluded that mifepristone effectively relieves the fibroid symptoms, decreases the size, thereby avoiding unnecessary surgery in women. ASRM also is saying that it is effective, and even in 2013, it was said that it reduces the leiomyoma volume and symptoms related to leiomyoma, that is the various forms of AUB. And now the Gynae Endocrine Society of India, GSI, also had this evidence-based good clinical practice recommendations for Indian women. And this was done by none other than our beloved Alka Kriplani ma'am. We all are very close to her, and I love quoting her study, because I remember when this study was happening, I was in Delhi those days, as Savannah has mentioned, and we were all told, like, Alka ma'am is doing this new study on mifepristone, when mifepristone had come out only in India for abortion, for medication abortion in the early weeks, that time we were told that Alka ma'am is doing that. And then eventually when the study came out, we feel very happy and very proud as her very close friends to talk about it. So this was spoken about as a newer medical option, that is low dose of mifepristone. Currently, that time it was not available in India, 25 milligram. They were breaking the tablet into several parts to do the study. That time it was not available, but this is the study that we had heard about then itself. Now, various textbooks also highlight the use of low-dose mifepristone in uterine fibroids. And so as we can see, our own Duru Shah ma'am and so many other books are also talking about the use of mifepristone in uterine fibroids. And various reviews, as we will see, are also recommending the usage of mifepristone in the treatment of fibroids. Now, Cochrane review is showing that mifepristone for uterine fibroids is showing that to determine the efficacy and safety of mifepristone for the management of uterine fibroids, the author had concluded this 112 participant trial that mifepristone reduced heavy menstrual bleeding and improved fibroid specific quality of life. They did not mention upon the size, but the main purpose was, you know, the patient who is bleeding very heavily, very frequently, she is literally begging us to relieve her. So at least in this study, they said, because Cochrane usually speaks against most of the things that the trials that are going on, but here they did not speak against. They said that yes, they did not mention about the size of the fibroid, but the quality of life of those women definitely improved because amenorrhea happened in most of the cases. So systematic review of mifepristone for the treatment of uterine leiomyoma. This is another study which concluded that published trials of mifepristone showed reduction in leiomyoma size and improvement in symptoms. So this study spoke about the reduction in size as well. Now, various controlled trials, as we can see, this is also an Indian study where they showed that after 3 months, there was a reduction in size, and also 3 months and 6 months both, that reduction in size of the leiomyoma and also reduction in the, obviously, in the amount of bleeding and amenorrhea in most of the cases. So various Indian controlled trials, as we can see here, all of them are giving us good reviews about the usage of mifepristone. In the first one, we can see that the mean hemoglobin increased by 2.7 grams per cent. In the second one, we can see significant reduction in menorrhagia, metrorrhagia, and all of that, and the various symptoms. In this study in Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi, they significantly reduced the bleeding days by causing amenorrhea in 100% of the patients. Alka ma'am said that mean myoma volume decreased by 35% in 25 milligram group and 22% in 10 milligram group. So thereby two strengths are available, 25 and 10. I don't know about most of the clinicians. I personally used the 25, and as Alka ma'am has already shown, at that time when they had broken the 200 milligram into several pieces to make it 25 milligram, at that time she realized that with the 25 milligram the results are much better. So even I would recommend all of us, or I would suggest that probably the 25 milligram is the better option. But in her study, definitely there was a reduction in the size or the volume of the myoma. And also so many other of the Indian studies showing that uterine volume, leiomyoma and largest leiomyoma volume decrease up to 30%, improved quality of life, and so on. All of them are giving us good reviews and are encouraging us to use mifepristone in the treatment of myomas. And here also we can see by in this UP study, the mean uterine volume reduced by more than 60%. So the uterine volume reduced, obviously the size of the myoma also reduced, and thereby the patient had lots of relief. That dragging pain because of the weight of the myoma itself can cause a lot of distress, and that also was relieved. So also another one in Lucknow, we can see that the complete resolution of complaints such as menorrhagia, polymenorrhea, and all of that. So the symptomatically the patient was much better. So we are having encouraging results from all of these. So in all of these 14 Indian studies, we saw that low dose mifepristone is reported to be safe and effective in patients with uterine fibroids. Now coming to some of the international studies, we see that artery blood flow reduced by 40%, and the those receiving leuprolide acetate had 21%. So compared to GnRH analogs, the improvement was more compared to the GnRH analogs. And also in another study, 42% became amenorrheic. No endometrial hyperplasia was noted in any of the sub. That's what I mentioned also earlier. Like ulipristal acetate is also an SPRM, and it is also used widely. But as in many studies, it is showing that it can give rise to some amount of hyperplasia, but hyperplasia has not been endometrial hyperplasia has not been reported so far by any of the major studies as far as mifepristone usage in fibroids has been studied. So in another study, lesser recurrence rate with mifepristone compared to GnRH analogs. This I also mentioned earlier, that probably recurrence with GnRH analogs once there is cessation of the treatment is there. But as far as mifepristone is concerned, the effects remain quite longer. So it might give us better results as far as the continuity of the effects is concerned. So some controlled trials comparing mifepristone and GnRH, it showed that mifepristone is as effective as GnRH analogs. Mifepristone is better tolerated than GnRH agonist, has lesser recurrence rate, and is more effective in decreasing blood flow to the uterus than the GnRH agonist. Now, this is also our own Indian study by our own beloved junior Ashish Kale. And he had compared ulipristal with mifepristone. And he said that the 25 milligram dosage of mifepristone is shown to be a good and effective way of treatment in fibroids less than 3 centimeter, in achieving 40% reduction in size and 50% reduction in menorrhagia as compared to ulipristal, which acts better in the subgroup of size 3 to 5 centimeter fibroids. And he said that more RCTs are required, but as far as this study is concerned, and other studies have also shown that when the fibroid is less than 3 centimeters, then mostly ulipristal is not effective, and mifepristone has much better results, and they actually cause shrinkage. And on top of that, as I earlier mentioned, there is hardly any risk of hyperplasia. So whenever we are dealing with small fibroids, the efficacy of mifepristone is much higher. When we are having small fibroids, if we give ulipristal, usually we will not get any good effect, but with mifepristone we will. Another thing, effect of ulipristal is that this study is showing, and other studies have also shown, that a significantly higher proportion of liver disorders was reported for ulipristal acetate than for mifepristone, and also leuprolide. So amongst all of these medications that are used in the medical treatment of fibroids, the safest seems to be mifepristone, because neither it causes endometrial hyperplasia. Yes, GnRH analog will also not cause endometrial hyperplasia, obviously, but amongst the other two, this does not cause endometrial hyperplasia. Moreover, it does not have any derogatory effect on the liver functions. Thereby, it is safe as far as our hepatotoxicity is concerned. And also efficacy of mifepristone versus GnRH analogs in the treatment of uterine leiomyoma. In this comparative study, it was seen that a marked relief with significant decrease in visual analog scale was found in both the groups, and treatment with mifepristone 25 milligram daily for the 3 months significantly reduced bleeding, uterine volume, and myoma volume. And we all know that the side effect profile is much, much better with mifepristone when compared to GnRH analogs. So coming to the safety of mifepristone in uterine fibroid patients, in various controlled trials, mifepristone in a dose of up to 50 milligrams per day, though in India we use it only up to 25, reported safe, and it was tolerated in uterine fibroid patients. No atypical hyperplasia was noted in mifepristone. Hyperplasia as such was hardly reported, but atypical to it was hardly ever reported in any of the studies. Endometrial biopsies showed no pre-malignant changes, even up to 50 milligram per day dosages for 3 months. So whichever, in India, I don't think there are studies regarding this, but in several countries there were, and they did not find any adverse effect as far as the endometrium is concerned. And as we all know that mifepristone does not cause the estrogen level to go very low. It keeps it at low normal or very, very low normal, not subnormal. Thereby, the risk in decrease in BMD and osteoporosis does not arise as compared to the GnRH analogs. And studies reveal little or no elevation in liver enzymes, which I have already mentioned. Now, coming to ulipristal, as we all know, there were 4 Pearl studies regarding all the various aspects of ulipristal, comparing 10 milligram with 5 milligram, comparing how long it can be taken. All of those 4 Pearl studies together showed that headaches and hot flashes were the most frequent adverse events, but occurred not in too many patients, around 10%. Other safety concerns as far as ovary and electrocardiums, ECGs were not there with ulipristal, but as I have already mentioned, transient increase in endometrial thickness occurred in less than around 10% of patients, and there can be some amount of hepatotoxicity as well. These were found from the 4 Pearl studies that we all know about. The other advantages of low dose mifepristone over the other therapies, I'll just like to summarize this, is that it is as effective as GnRH analog, no effect on bone mineral density, no risk of osteoporosis, unlike GnRH analogs, as we all know. It has lesser side effects, oral route of administration with good compliance. It allows time to correct anemia and plan surgery if we want to just reduce the bleeding and let the patient improve her hemoglobin, and then if we want to take her up for surgery later, that also does not cause too much of a problem. Menses usually revert within a month or maximum 2 months of stopping therapy. I remember Sadhana ma'am had mentioned, as far as Dynogest is concerned, also fertility resumes very soon. Here also menstruation and fertility resume maximum within 2 months, usually within 1 month. It has lesser recurrence rate as compared to GnRH analogs. I mentioned that once GnRH analogs are stopped, very quickly the fibroid again starts increasing in size and the symptomatology begins, and thereby the patient suffering also starts. But as far as mifepristone is concerned, once we stop the therapy, the good effects that we have already got remain for some time. That's why the patient is also happy. Moreover, there is less chance of hepatotoxicity or any other endometrial hyperplasia as compared to ulipristal, and it improves the health-related quality of life, which we all can see from this discussion. And low-dose mifepristone, if I have to summarize, I would like to say that it is the first selective progesterone receptor modulator with anti-progesterone action. Several studies worldwide, 27 controlled trials, including 14 that, from India that we've already seen. Symptomatic improvement, 14 maybe more after that. Symptomatic improvement in more than 90% of the patients. It decreases the fibroid volume to quite some extent, 50 to 60%, if not so at least 30 to 40%, decreases in uterine volume also to a huge extent, thereby the dragging pain caused by the huge size of the uterus is also relieved. It increases the hemoglobin levels up till 2.5 to 3 grams %, and menses revert after within 1 to 2 months, and thereby it is a reversible mode if in a young patient, if she wants fertility and if she wants to gain her menses back, then it is also a safe option. And because the fertility is not hampered, it usually comes back within a few months itself. And thereby one more thing I would like to say, many of you might ask me that why am I not talking about LNG IUCDs? Because as we spoke about the FIGO classification of the fibroids, there might be submucous, there might be grade 1 intramural, where some of it is projecting into the cavity, and where there are several fibroids, the cavity can be totally distorted. In that case, levonorgeal IUCD is not even an option. Only when it is an myometrial or subserous, then it might be an option. And in subserous, whether it is very effective is also very doubtful. Only in intramyometrial myomas, where the cavity is not distorted, there even LNG IUCD is an option, and thereby I am not considering it amongst the first line therapies of fibroids, because fibroid can be anywhere, it can distort the cavity. Thereby we have to keep that in mind, and we have to think of that, and thereby thinking of the various modes of treatment. I just wanted to mention that in case somebody is wondering why I didn't mention it. Now, low dose mifepristone is safe for continuous prolonged periods. It can be used for several months. Studies show that because ulipristal, as we all know, has to be used for a maximum of 3 months, then we have to give a minimum of 1 cycle gap, and then if needed, we can reuse it. But here we do not have to stop mifepristone. We can continue it for several months, and once it stops, its efficacy still continues, as we have already said time and again. It is free from severe hypoestrogenic effects. As I mentioned, it makes the estrogen level low normal or just below the normal level, but not very suboptimal. Thereby, it does not cause severe hypoestrogenic effects. It is effective in deep-seated intramural myomas as well. It has a triple mode of action, as I already mentioned, through the HPO axis, directly on the fibroid and also on the endometrium. It is very, very effective in smaller myomas, as I have already mentioned, less than 3 centimeter. I think it is probably the first line of our treatment, and it is safe and effective in women who are seeking future fertility, and also in women who are waiting for surgery, waiting to improve their hemoglobin or to buy some time. This is also another effective mode of treatment, and it has been found that after using mifepristone, if we are going for a myomectomy also, the plane of cleavage is not much hampered, but with ulipristal there can be some amount of distortion of the plane of cleavage, because we have seen many, and with GnRH analog it is even more. all of us have seen that after GnRH analogs, the plane of cleavage, if we're attempting a myomectomy, is very badly hampered. Might be less with ulipristal, but still might be there with mifepristone. Usually that is not too much of a problem. So it is safe and effective in women who are also seeking fertility. And more or less, I have summed up what I had to say. And this dosage guideline is, as we all know, it should be started in the first half of the cycle, preferably within the first 5 days, so to give it the maximum efficacy, because otherwise the receptors can play havoc. So it is better not to start in the second half, but to start in the first half of the cycle. And as we recommend for most of the hormones, like in OCP or any other hormonal preparation, we say it should be taken at the same time roughly every day. And minimum treatment duration is 3 to 6 months, but there's nothing like ulipristal that after 3 months we have to stop and then we may restart. We can continue this for long periods. And in several of the control trials, low dose mifepristone is safely given for 12 months or even longer, and it should be given after food. And thereby I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for your patient listening. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Queenie Aditya, for such an excellent and academic and a detailed presentation. You had included so many of the evidence-based foundations, which really makes it really academic. Even Sadhana
tried my best.
Included today's event.
Savannah, I had to speak after Sadhana ma'am. So, you know, the level has been risen so high. The level was taken so high that though I did not have time, I had to, you know, go through a little bit, because after Sadhana ma'am, it would have seemed very, very poor. So I had to at least go up to 50% of her level. That is why I tried.
It was very good, Queenie. It was excellent.
Thank you, ma'am.
I enjoyed. We enjoyed.
Thank you, ma'am. I mean, these words from a person as learned as you, Pranam, I'm really overwhelmed. I mean, any kind of words of appreciation as far as academics is concerned from you is really matlab sarakho. I'm really, really grateful.
Yeah, there was a question from the audience which Dr. Sadhana Gupta ma'am had tackled it. I had sent the answer. Is there any questions from the audience? There is one question and answer. Ma'am, this is in continuation of the question which you have answered. This particular patient, if taken for surgery, antiplatelets need to be stopped, which carries 5% of risk of stent thrombosis. Antiplatelet can be stopped safely after 1 year. Is this you have answered, or is the question?
It is the same patient which is having a submucous fibroid.
Ma'am, please use this one.
So my answer was that you keep on the medical management of the fibroid. Queenie, it was a serious 2-section submucous myoma, and the patient had the stenting, cardiac stenting few days ago, and antiplatelet and ecosprin. So there is somebody else has given answer. So what is your choice? My choice is to give the medical treatment, especially for a while, and rule out endometrial malignancy. This was one thing, because endometrium was quite thick. So what is your opinion? And we will like to have your input, because fibroid was your topic, na?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
can you see the question, Queenie? Can you see the question? Question is 40 years female, P2L2, previous LSCS, family completed with history of menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea. Received 2 units of PRVC 10 days back, maybe because of the anemia. USG suggestive of uterus 12 centimeter. ET is 18. 80 is high, 18. And IM fibroid 3 centimeter. SS fibroid subserous 3. Intramural 3, subserous 3. Patient underwent stenting. There is a this thing 1.5 months back, and she's on ecosprin and antiplatelet for stenting. And mother has a history of CF breast. What can be the choice of treatment?
As ma'am has mentioned, anything. What is the age? 50.
40, but family completed.
Family completed, but 40. Still, she's coming. 40 is still in the perimenopausal age group. Anything above.
Don't put her in perimenopausal. She's just starting her life.
Yeah. So then we weren't born yet, right? We are still intrauterine.
Yes.
Right?
She is in her prime.
Yeah, prime. So,
Right.
but biologically, she's approaching the perimenopausal age group when she's around 40. Even if someone is 35 or 32, and if the endometrium is 18 and it is staying like that, I will go for a biopsy. And whatever the age is, first of all,
Yes.
I'm going to rule out any endometrial pathology. I cannot sit with an 18 millimeter endometrium and worry about the fibroids first. I will first worry about the endometrium and later on fibroid, unless it is very possibility of leiomyoma sarcoma is very, very low, and that also happens in very large sizes. If the leiomyoma is 8, 10, 12 centimeters, we can still think about it. Any size smaller than that, I'm not concerned about the malignancy potential. I'm concerned about the malignancy potential, as madam has mentioned, of the endometrium.
Endometrium.
So first we are going to tackle that. First we do that, then we will, after that is ruled out, we will think of the next mode of action.
In pedigree, see, mother has a CA breast. Mother
Yes,
is
mother and CA, breast and ovary go together. Usually breast and the other things, fibroid is not correlated, and endometrial is also not correlated with the breast. But anyways, any woman who is having irregular bleeding, whatever problem she's having, she's sitting with 18 millimeter. I will not see her again unless she gets a biopsy done for this. I will refuse to see this patient because many patients say, "Nahi, ye hai, wo hai." There are patients who said, "Aap directly uterus remove kar diye." Other doctors might have told them, I will never even think of removing uterus or anything without first doing an endometrial biopsy, as ma'am very rightly has said.
And with PAP also, I feel we should do a PAP smear also.
Ma'am is saying something. Ma'am is saying
It
something.
is
ma'am, sorry.
FOBC, GCPR and the professional body recommendation also. Around 40, any abnormal uterine bleeding, we have to rule out the endometrial malignancy, and pap smear is the...
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. But what I'm saying is that when the ET is 18, then definitely we are not going to sit on it. Na?
Yes.
Even when it is 9, 10, we will maybe think it is to give the benefit of doubt and do the biopsy. But when it is 18, we will not sit on it and think about the fibroid. The fibroid will
Irrespective
come
of the
second.
age, whether she is whatever age, when we see an ET of 18, then definitely we want to rule out what's there in the endometrium.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We have to think of the first thing first. If we have to save our life, then think about the quality of life. First, we have to save our life.
Yes.
Any other question and answer for one more? There is one more question. Okay, if patient is 40 years plus, should we start MIFE without endometrial sampling? In the same findings, 18 millimeter, I should not, but
18 millimeter, I will not start anything. And as ma'am said, first I will, if the patient refuses to do a biopsy, I will refuse to remain her doctor any longer. Because I cannot take that responsibility on my head, and tomorrow she's dying of endometrial cancer and they'll throw a case on me. I cannot do that. If they are not willing, they should go for some medication.
Especially if the patient is older. Especially if the patient is older. All the more reason to worry.
All the more reason. But even if she's 35, and this it is 12, 13, 14, at 35, 40, any patient who comes with 11, 12, 13, first thing I do is an endometrial biopsy. By whatever office biopsy, admission and DNC, whatever the mode
is available to us.
Yes.
Nothing at all.
More than 10, we will not. More than 10, we will not let it go. Okay,
Yes.
it might so happen that maybe 35, 36, and it is coming 10, 11. We might give benefit of doubt and ask her to come back after 1 or 2 cycles with next cycle post-menstrual to see whether it was an incidental finding. But if it is persisting, we will not sit on it.
No, I'm referring to the question. The question is if the patient is 40 years plus. If 40 plus, can we start without sampling? My answer is especially when it is 40 plus. When it's higher age, then 100% sampling has to be done.
No, that is only when it is, if it's a normal endometrial thickness, and then there is no need for us to go for it. No, we are talking only
18 mm. 18 mm.
18 mm, so we will do. But what I'm saying is that any patient who is 40, 45, we have spoken about the treatment with mifepristone. We do not have to do an endometrial sampling before starting. It is not the prerequisite. If the endometrial thickness is normal and we are only doing it for the fibroid, then we do not have to do a sampling first. That is not a prerequisite. My question is that only when the bleeding, we do not know whether it is because of the fibroid or because of the endometrium. When the endometrium, we can see it is thick, then we definitely have. If it is coming as 5-6 millimeter endometrium, the prerequisite is not doing an endometrial sampling in 100% of cases. When we start any of the medications, the prerequisite is not to do first an endometrial sampling. No, that is only when we are doubtful about the endometrium.
One more
Right,
question.
ma'am?
Can medical treatment be the final treatment for a patient around 40, or surgical treatment is a definitive treatment?
Medical treatment, if she is improving on medical treatment and after the cessation of treatment is fine, then she is fine. Then maybe once she goes into menopause, the fibroids might shrink further. We don't know. So if she is symptomatically okay for a 3, 4, 5 centimeter fibroid, we do not have to operate every woman. Then in this country, almost every woman will be left without a uterus. Right, ma'am?
Sadhana,
Dr. Queen, just
one thing is very, very important. Actually, around 40, 45 years, the best treatment is medical treatment, because anyway, you patient has
Sadhana Gupta, ma'am,
amenorrhea.
kindly use the earphone. Yeah, this. Yes, yes. Thank you,
Hello.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
So actually around 40 years, the medical treatment is the treatment of choice, especially with the small few fibroids, because patient has amenorrhea, very good quality of life. And in my clinical practice, in 9 to 10 months, and there is no need of any treatment. We stop medical treatment and we avoid hysterectomy actually in most of the patients. So that is the beauty of medical treatment, that the uterus, ovary, everything is retained, and we have a very good, only for the large fibroid, I will say. And one important point, that it may be that in ultrasound, what is the problem? Why this question is there? On ultrasound, there may be the persistence of fibroid. But actually what happens with medical treatment, the proliferation is gone, apoptosis is there. So on ultrasound, we find that imaging, but the patient is totally symptom free. And don't consider only on that ultrasound that the patient needs hysterectomy. That is very, very important point, that on ultrasound you are going to get, it is not going to disappear, but the proliferative capacity is gone, and the patient is amenorrheic, and she is having reduced menstrual bleeding, and everybody. So this is the point actually where you are seeing ultrasound array, like let's remove it. So the primary aim of medical treatment is to avoid hysterectomy. Actually, it is not only to take the time. Like this
just one question, madam. Just taking a cue from this specific question. I mean, what does the studies say? How long after medical therapy? Suppose, say, we are giving a medical therapy for 6 months, mifepristone. The symptoms have subsided. Then how long? In fact, how long is this medical treatment effective? It's how long after stoppage of medical treatment does the symptoms return? Menometrorrhagia and the size reduction in the size of the fibroid. How long does it stay?
In my clinical experience, I don't give more than 6 months, not more than 6 months. In my clinical experience, most of the patient get quite well, and we have we do once in a 6 month or once in a year, you get only your ultrasound done. So we have a look on endometrium and what is going on. And around 47, 48, 40, 40, 45, the patient is already in the menopause, and really we avoid in so many patients. So it is not more than, I give for 6 months. What about Queen? What you say? I usually give in the 6 months, and that is not more than 6 months. We don't give it. If the heavy menstrual bleeding or something returned, only then we consider. Otherwise, only ultrasound we guide. We take the ultrasound imaging and the symptomatic relief.
There is one more question. Yes. Medical management of choice. After seeing the HPR histopathology report, if it comes out as benign, this is the one best friend something to Queenie ma. Medical management of choice. See, we do the endometrial curetage or whatever is available to us, fractional whatever. So histopathology report is coming as benign. So what will be the medical management of choice? I think this refers to our first question about 40 year with 18 mm with yes.
So when the histopathology of the endometrium is benign, then as I mentioned in my talk, we have to know the size of the fibroid. Different
sizes. She has subserous 3. Where is the first question? Subserous and the intramural is 3 and subserous 3. 2 she had.
So if it's 3 or less than 4, I think mifepristone is quite safe. But I have seen, and also Ashish Kale's study I had mentioned, that usually in the larger ones, mifepristone does not have much benefit, though it will reduce the amenorrhea. As far it will cause amenorrhea and reduce the bleeding, but the size is usually not shrunken by mifepristone in the higher sizes. Ulipristal, they say, is more effective in the bigger sizes, but I use ulipristal very sparingly. Very unfortunately, one of my close friends who was on ulipristal, whether it is coincidental or whether it had happened because of it, I don't know. My own friend, she suffered C endometrium. I had to operate on her after that. I cannot say whether it is coincidental or whether it happened because of it. In more cases also I found hyperplasia of the endometrium, and I am very scared to use too much of ulipristal. I personally use mifepristone. When we are giving it in larger sizes, we have to tell them that symptomatically you will be fine. Maybe the fibroid might not shrink. I think that is the counseling we can do beforehand.
Yes.
No,
There
the
is one more
latest
question.
guideline.
Yes. Yeah,
The
yes,
latest
yes.
guideline about ulipristal is, it has come in March this year, I think March 2020. In no patients should you start ulipristal for the first time. I mean, in 1919, last year, the guideline had come that there was liver injury, but this year in March, the guideline, they say that you should not start ulipristal for the treatment of fibroid in a new patient.
Actually, yes,
The new
I
patient.
will.
Suppose
Yes,
a new fibroid
yes.
patient has come to you, you should
Yes,
not start a treatment with ulipristal until further studies are available.
okay. Until
I will
unless you
say,
do
I
proper
will comment to
investigation.
it, Dr. Udayan, because this is not few papers I have gone through. One thing is that the many professional body association have really said objection that in a COVID time they have put a bar on the ulipristal. But ulipristal has not been associated with the drug which is categorized in drug-induced acute liver injury. So liver function test we have to monitor for sure. And still now what you say that it is not associated, but at some states they have put ban on the ulipristal. What you say that you should
Yes,
not
yes.
start in
Yes,
the
yes,
thing
yes,
because,
right.
but it is not categorized, and many professional bodies have put a strong objection that in COVID time they have put ban when we really need the option of medical treatment. So still it is not considered as a drug-induced acute liver injury. And what about the progesterone associated endometrial change? What happens when
Yes.
we started ulipristal? Then I repeated to representative that I am is saying that always endometrium is thickened on the follow-up ultrasound. Patient is amenorrheic, but the this thing. Then we know a complete entity that is progestin-induced
That is
endometrial change. So
that is
we
another
come
thing.
to
But
know,
because
but
of the liver,
like queen concern is also there that we really, when it is constantly thickened, we have to rule out again malignancy. As a clinician, what you have said. So ulipristal is a big question mark. At least we should be very careful with the liver function test in follow-up and in start. And mifepristone is a good alternative to us. And
yes,
As
yes,
I just
that's
also,
what.
it is very,
That's
very
what.
good alternative.
As I
Very
would
good
like
and
to
safe.
comment, that's what I said, ma'am. What I tried to say is that when it is small size, 4 or 3 or less, then we know that in most cases it will work. We have to do the proper counseling that the size might not shrink in 100% cases, but you will be symptomatically much better. That is okay. But the possibility of the size shrinking in the smaller fibroids is much more. As also Ashish Kale's study has also shown, there are other international studies also that in the larger myomas, probably the size shrinkage will not be there with mifepristone. So that is something we have to just tell them beforehand. They should need that counseling. But theoretically it's saying that larger fibroids are tackled better by ulipristal. But I personally said I'm too scared to start ulipristal at all. So that is why I said that probably theoretically we can tell them there is another medication available, but its side effects may be too high. That is why we do not want to put you on that. It is better we put you on this. You symptomatically you will be better. Whether the size of the fibroid will shrink or not, that we have to see in your case individually what is happening. But to reassure them that you start this medicine and within 2 months or 3 months your fibroid will be gone, this is something we should not do.
We should not do.
There is
That is what I
another
was trying to say.
Few
Madam,
studies are also
the-
that we start with 25 milligram for 3 months and then 10 milligram.
The shift to
These
10
studies,
milligram
yes.
later.
There
Yes.
are many
Even I do
studies
that.
also.
Even I do that. 3 months at least I
question,
continue 25. If required, I shift to 10.
Yeah, can mife be used for menorrhagia even if there is no fibroid? I think we have answered to that. Even if there is no fibroid, can mife be used for menorrhagia as such?
can be used because amongst the other methods of action, it will not work on the fibroid, it will work on the endometrium and on the HPO axis theoretically. But unless there is an association with fibroid, I don't think there are other modes of treatment. We will go for
Yes.
the other modes of treatment. Why will we go in for this kind of a...
mode of treatment? Why go to MIFE? I think the last question, Sadhana Gupta ma'am, I think I will...
We can also go for an LNG IUCD, right? When
Yes.
there is no fibroid, why do we have to go for this? Theoretically, it is possible. Why should we go for it at all?
For menorrhagia. Sadhana Gupta ma'am, the question is, but average age of menopause is 50 plus these days, question mark. Your opinion, please.
Yes, I agree to it. Menarche is early and menopause is like late. Yes, it is 40, 50, but like what we say around 40, 45, I found it is very good drug. And in most of the cases, actually, we really avoid hysterectomy. We are really, our aim is to avoid hysterectomy, actually. It is not,
Yes,
unless it is a submucous or
yes.
something. And FIGO even recommends, like, now world is actually returning, and a little global from the patient view, world is returning to non-invasive and the medical treatment. And what our ना scripture, वो हमारे जो शास्त्र कहते हैं, prevention सबसे अच्छा है with the good lifestyle, so that they have family and the thing at the right age. That is prevention, no environmental. Then the medical, and the last option, this is तामसी जो treatment होता है वो surgery होता है. Always risk anesthesia, surgery, we don't know. So the world is coming back to medical treatment with so many things, and we have to be open and we have to be medically minded, because it really reduces so many risk factors which are associated with surgery. So it is a little panoramic view that we have to change the mindset to all of us as a physician. So
any more questions? I have moderated quite a number of webinars, but this is one of the webinars where we get maximum number of questions from the audience. They cannot get enough of the experts, Sadhana Gupta ma'am and Queenie Aditya ma'am.
Oh God,
that the event is a real success, because see, people have to listen to you properly and understand for them to put the question right. Thank you so much. So then this one, is there any more questions? Okay, so now on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank, first of all, I would like to thank this one, our Gitendra Sharma sir, for being kind enough to be the chief guest. And would like to thank Dr. Udayan Sarkar for taking time off from your busy schedule and agreeing to be a chairperson of today's function and staying till the end. And our experts, Dr. Sadhana Gupta ma'am and Queenie Aditya ma'am, not only it was scientifically filled, evidence-based and action-packed talk, and even the question answer was really, really very interesting, and the day-to-day questions you have answered very well. And last but not the least, I would like to thank the organizers, this one, Ecumentis and this Harmonica, for the kind support and for making the webinar a grand success. There is one more last question. They cannot get enough of you. Is it possible to see recording later? Of course, this our
Definitely, ma'am. We'll send you the recording for sure.
the organizers must have recorded. Khushbu, could you kindly answer
Yes,
this?
ma'am, definitely we have recorded it and we'll share you the link shortly. And also I'd like to address that we have opened a YouTube channel. Harmonica Equipment is a YouTube channel where we regularly upload our CME videos. So I'll send you a link for that also. You can subscribe that, and there also you can see all our videos. This webinar will also be uploaded there. And personally, I will share the link as well. Yeah.
Yes, I think the question was asked by Kusum, Dr. Kusum, Mrs. Kusum, like Khushbu, it will be good if you kindly trace the mobile number or where Madam Kusum can be reached, and kindly send also those audience. I would like to thank, without the participants of the audience, no event can be a success. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking time out and making the event a grand success.
Thank you
So,
so much,
Dr.
Savannah.
Kusum, I'll
I
send
really
you
can't
the
thank you
link.
enough. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Thank you so much, Uday and Dada, for your time and for your very
Most
kind
welcome. My
interaction.
pleasure. My
Today was
pleasure.
Thanking,
today was
thanking.
one hell of a day, Queen. Today was really, it was action packed from 4 a.m. 4 a.m. I will not tell you what I did from 4 a.m. Then I was in the middle of a procedure around 2. Then I said, okay, by around 2:30, I will wind up and join you. Then suddenly my daughter runs in and says that, Mom, my braces is broken. The braces was sticking out. So I had to call up a dental doctor in this COVID time. Then I had to rush to the dental clinic. 2:15, I started my car. 2:30, I dropped her. But I did not wait. I asked my daughter, like elder daughter, to wait with her. And I came back driving, and it's a very narrow mile, and there was a water tanker blocking my this one entrance. So I had to drive again round way. Just managed to reach by 3. Anything for you, Queen.
Thank you. It was
Action-packed day,
wonderful. It was
action-packed day.
Not
wonderful.
yet
But
over. Picture abhi baki hai.
I hope you did not regret.
No,
I
no,
hope
no,
you did
no,
not
no.
regret because I think we all had a great time today.
No, 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 no,
Thank
no.
you, Sadhana ma'am. Thank you so much. And once again,
Also,
the very best from all of us.
I will say,
I would request everyone to kindly support our dearest Sadhana ma'am, our most beloved ma'am. And you all have seen her speaking and you all know her how learned she is. She is a very dedicated person and very, very well educated, well read, and always keeping up with the latest advances. And I really request everyone to kindly support her. And once again, thanking Udayanda for this very valuable time.
Whether I regret or I'm happy, there is one more question you need to tackle it. One more question. I cannot find out.
Thank you, Queen. It was
45
real
year
pleasure.
old,
Your this thing, enthusiasm.
5 more minutes. 45-year-old treatment with Mife for 6 months. After some period of amenorrhea, she had bleed. Can we restart mifepristone?
Yes, you can. Mifepristone is very safe. If you want to be on the safer side, do a CBC, do an LFT. It will nothing will be wrong. The reports as far as mifepristone is concerned, there will not be a problem. Up till 12 months, so many people are using. So after 6 months, if again there is recurrence of symptoms, there is no harm in starting again. As ma'am has said, then we will reach the menopause and then we will not need any more. And the uterus has also been saved. She has been spared of the knife. She did not have to undergo any morbidity because of a major surgery. So I think I can only bless the people who have brought these medications to us.
A group photo now.
Yes, please. Khushbu, please arrange a group photo.
Yes. Screenshot.
Khushbu, can we see you as well? Khushbu, we would like to see you as well.
Yeah, ma'am, definitely.
Please come on and we would like to see a group photo, please.
Can you see me, ma'am? I cannot remove the mask because
No
I am
problem.
in office.
No problem.
Yeah. I'll click the photo, ma'am.
Yeah, yes.
Your pretty eyes are good enough.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'll send you the photo. I guess Dr. Jitendra has left in between. As he told me yesterday.
No
Yeah, he told me yesterday that he was busy. He'll be there till 4 o'clock or something.
Yes, spared his time. We are more than grateful.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Sadhana ma'am, you stayed right throughout. Thank you so much for your time. Udayan sir, thank you so much. You interacted, you asked us questions, you heard both of us speak and you spared your time. I'm really grateful. And Savannah, I can't thank you enough. You might be one of my closest friends, but I can't thank you enough for sparing your time.
Friends are also
Okay.
Ma'am, I was saving the best for the last. All the best for your election, ma'am. And we should do an event for Impal Obs and Gyne Society also.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody. And best of luck, Sadhana madam.
Yes, absolutely. And Udayan Dada, thank you so much for your precious time.
Most welcome, most welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Udayan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.